Well, welcome to the Good Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. David Beers, and I'm very excited today to have one of my good friends on the podcast, Dr. Myles Greenberg. And Myles has a really interesting career that he's gone through. Started out in emergency medicine, which to me, emergency medicine is real medicine. It's not the same thing over and over again. Every day there's something new that happens, and it's actually where a lot of exciting and a lot of the skills that you have to have being a treating physician in the emergency department. Really, you have to know a lot of things, and you have to be able to diagnose things in a different way. But Myles has kind of taken a little bit different arc of his career, and we want to talk about, really, in general, what does training in medicine prepare you for other than just treating patients? Because I think that's what most people think about when you think about medicine is, hey, that's the doctor standing in front of the patient or the surgeon cutting open the patient and having a procedure. But there's actually a lot that you can do with a medical degree that isn't directly involved with patient care. And so Myles, I think, has gone from looking at X-rays, seeing if somebody broke their leg or their arm or something in the emergency room to actually having, I think, over 100 patents now. Myles, a prolific inventor and a serial entrepreneur, and he's done something that I think most physicians don't manage to pull off in an effective way, that they can take the analytical toolkit that they learned during medicine and turn that into a career as an inventor and an entrepreneur. And so really just happy to have you here today. And I think we'll have a fun discussion here today. Thanks for joining us, Myles.
Well, thanks for promoting me, David, as an inventor. It's probably more accurate to say, though, that I glom off of other people's inventions and try to help create and grow businesses off of them. I guess one of the things that you get from being an emergency physician is a understanding that you know a lot about, or you know a little bit about a lot of things, I should say, but not very much about any one thing. So it gives you the necessary humility to be able to plunge into a startup company.
Yeah, no, it's it takes a different mindset to do that, to jump in and do that kind of stuff. So let's just kind of start at the beginning, and I think most people, a lot of people, I think when they're young and they're looking at their potential of what they can do, there's quite a few people that will have doctor on the list of things that they'd be interested in, and I think once you get a little older and longer in school, you look at that and say, man, I don't know if I want to be in college for 20 years, right? 20 years of training to actually start practicing as a physician. And a lot of people look at that and say, yeah, I'm just not. I mean, my own experience, I actually started out thinking, I want to go into medicine, and I made the mistake, as a sophomore in college, to volunteer at a hospital during the summer.
I knew you were smarter than me, Dave.
And they gave me the worst jobs in the hospital, and I was like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I remember the moment I made the decision not to go to medical school, I was debriding a wound and just thinking, yeah, this is not for me. I don't like this idea. But obviously there's a lot more to medicine than I think most people have in their head. And just walk us through your career, when you started out and said, I want to go to medical school. How did that happen? When did that happen for you in your life?
Well, it's only one of two acceptable professions for a nice Jewish boy, right?
That's right.
And I didn't want to be a lawyer, so here I am. I think if you asked my mother, she would have told you it comes from watching too many episodes of MASH.
Yeah, right, there you go. Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is that even back when I was applying to medical school, I had this idea in my head that I was very interested in the business and public policy aspects of healthcare, the sort of the bigger picture, if you will. And I, even from the beginning of medical school, for me personally, I was poking around looking for ways to break myself out of the regimented medical box.
Yeah. So tell us where did you go to medical school, and how did you make the decision? So just so everybody, people that aren't as familiar with the process, when you decide, hey, emergency medicine might be something I'm interested in, how did that happen?
Well, I went to medical school at Yale in New
Okay.
Haven,
Yep.
probably the best thing to come out of that whole situation is I met my wife there
Oh,
when
there
I
you
was
go.
when I was a second year medical student. So fortunately for me, she was a graduate student there as well, and that worked out nicely. But emergency medicine, I made the decision to go into emergency medicine actually in large part because of what I've just mentioned to you previously, which is I knew I had other things on my mind other than just practicing clinical medicine long term. And I thought to myself, okay, how can I keep practicing medicine, but do it in such a way that I'm actually going to have the time to do these other things?
Mm.
It's pretty difficult if you're going to be let's say, a practicing surgeon,
Yeah.
right? You got to be in the operating room. You got to be following your patients who you just operated on, right? It's challenging to do that part time, right?
Yeah.
Emergency medicine, though, the good and the bad of it, I guess, is that it's shift work at the end of the day. So you walk out and you could do whatever you want. So you find a lot of guys and gals who like to ski and windsurf and do all this other stuff outside of medicine. And I like that stuff too, but I was also interested in pursuing things that were outside of the pure practice of clinical medicine.
Yeah, and that's and one I guess I can turn your comment back on you that you were a lot smarter than me, because I didn't have any kind of perception when I was young that you could actually do something other than just treat patients with a medical degree, and that's something that I started to learn as I really developed in my career. I obviously went into the lab and got a PhD and really focused on the research side of things. And then I started to run into MDs all the time in the lab. And I was like, how did you end up here? You have a medical degree. Aren't you supposed to be over in the hospital? Why are you in the lab? And they're like, oh, yeah, you can do research when you're a doctor. It's like, oh, a physician, you can be a researcher. And I actually ran into several people that actually never went to residency. They went to medical school and then just went right into the lab. And what was interesting is they got paid more than me. When I was a professor, I was like, hey, wait a minute, you get paid more when you have a medical degree? It's like, wow, that's pretty interesting. So that's a little nugget out there for the people that want to stay in academic research. You actually get on a different pay scale if you have an MD degree than a PhD. And you could basically do very similar things, because you can leave medical school and go and do a postdoctoral fellowship and actually just be a researcher. And nobody had ever told me that was even an option, right?
Yeah, well, the downside to all that, of course, is the big pile of student loans you end up with.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there is a difference there. So there's a word of warning to you if you're listening to this, that there it does come with a cost. Yeah, that there is medical school is certainly a lot more expensive than graduate school, but it's interesting. I think there's been there was a movement many years ago to try to encourage people to go into academic medicine and to become researchers, and they created the MD PhD degree. So it's kind of a combined degree where you go to medical school for a couple of years, then you take a few years off to get a PhD, and then you finish up medical school. And the nice thing to entice people is that there's less expense associated with that. And so it's a lot of schooling. But the idea was that they were going to train a bunch of great academic clinical scientists, researchers. And what they ended up doing is trained a bunch of bankers, because it feels like everybody I meet that's on Wall Street on the pharmaceutical and biotech side are MD PhDs. And they love them because they're like, they can evaluate the medical side, the clinical side, and the research side, and we don't have to hire two people. But it just kind of tells you how people value a medical degree. It's actually the rigor, the training, the exposure that you get going through the process of training in medicine actually gives you some transferable skills that I think you don't get with other degrees. So it's not so crazy when you think about, hey, obviously you must have been a pretty darn good student to get into Yale Medical School and to go to medical school there. And people will look at that and say, well, how did this happen where you've actually, I think in your career, you probably spent less time being a practicing physician than you have being an entrepreneur. Is that correct? That's
Yeah.
BioHive Week is almost here, and the hive is buzzing. April 13th to the 17th, Utah's life science ecosystem takes center stage with a week of events spotlighting the people, companies, and ideas driving healthcare innovation forward. Don't miss BioHive Week's 2 anchor events. BioHive Live, a one-day conference with TED-style talks from visionary founders, researchers, and ecosystem leaders. And the Best of BioHive Awards Gala, celebrating the best of the best, from established leaders to exceptional early career talent in Utah's life sciences. All eyes will be on Utah for BioHive Week. Learn more at biohive.com.
I mean, I left Yale. I went and I did a residency in emergency medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. And this was back so I graduated medical school in 1993, a while ago. And back then, emergency medicine was still in its relative infancy as a recognized medical specialty. So there weren't as many residency training programs back then as there are today. And Pittsburgh was one of the better ones. I spent 3 years there training as an emergency physician, which involves not just emergency medicine, but being in lots of other areas of the hospital, taking care of lots of different kinds of patients in lots of different settings. And then I took my first job as an emergency medicine attending physician in Boston. So I'm from the Boston area originally. My wife and I got married right after I finished my residency, and we moved to Boston. And I worked at the Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, actually as one of the first wave of emergency medicine trained physicians in the emergency department there. My wife worked at Children's Hospital. She's in child psych. And after doing that for a few years, after doing that for about the first year, I realized that my ambition to want to run a hospital someday was going to founder on the shoals of not wanting to fire a bunch of nurses, which is what I was being asked to do as the assistant director of the emergency department there. One of my jobs early on was also to start a mid-level practitioner program in the ED. So I hired a staff of about a dozen nurse practitioners and PAs, none of whom had worked in the ED before, which was not surprising because this was new as a specialty. We trained them, got them going. Turned out, though, the hospital was losing so much money that about 6 months later, they made me get rid of all of them. And given the fact that my wife was a nurse practitioner, as one data point, it was not what I saw myself doing in the future, firing nurses.
Yeah.
So I said, all right, plan A, maybe not such a good idea. What am I going to do now?
Yeah.
And so, I didn't know how to do a lot, but one thing I did know how to do was to go to school.
Yeah.
And so I decided to apply to business school, and I ended up going to business school a few years after joining the staff at the BI. And it was through that discovery process that my eyes really opened up, Dave, because I don't know what it's like to be a PhD student, but I imagine it's somewhat similar in this way to being an MD student. You really have the blinders on.
You do.
Is, the pathway right in front of you.
Yep.
This is how you practice medicine. This is what the world is about. It's within the 4 walls of the hospital or what have you.
Yep.
And you don't really know much about anything beyond that. My business experience consisted of just what I just told you.
Yeah, that's right. Hiring and firing people.
And hired a few people. I had to manage a little budget along the way. But beyond that, I really knew nothing about business. It was a very eye-opening experience going to business school and suddenly being surrounded by, 800 people in my class, none of whom, well, a couple of whom were from medicine, but the vast, vast majority of whom had been investment bankers, consultants, people who worked at GE, people from every walk of the business life other than what I had been doing.
Well, and you're exactly right. I think that was exactly my experience is you get exposed and really, really deep into your training, and that's what right? And so that's why I think most scientists, their first their first inclination is, well, I know how to be a researcher in a university, and that's really what I'm being prepared to do, is be a professor. And, similar type of thing to me. I became a professor, and that's what I was taught to do. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe there's something else I could do. And but a whole different world that I didn't even think about. But one of the things that I noticed, as I made that transition between being just a pure hardcore basic scientist in the lab, trying to uncover, make scientific discoveries, there's some really transferable approaches to the way that we approach both medicine and science that actually can apply to business in a really interesting way. So in medicine, you're trained, and especially as an emergency medicine, that differential diagnosis is kind of what you do, right? You have somebody come in and you say, okay, do they have a fever? Do they, these types of things. And then you start ruling out possibilities of things that, and you're kind of left with, well, it's either this or this, and then I can run a test to tell this or this. But in a business framework, that's actually kind of interesting. I've thought about that a lot, that being able to have multiple hypotheses to say it could be this, this, or this, and then you weight the probability to say, well, what's the likelihood that this is going to work, or this is what we're facing, and then to systematically go through and rule things in or out. That's basically due diligence, right? I mean, that's what we do in a business setting. And have you found that your medical training actually helped you with that side of things?
Absolutely. So you and I are both CEOs and have been CEOs of biotech and medical device companies. And, one of the things when you're a CEO, or really any role in business, right, is you're usually operating with a lot of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
You're operating with imperfect information, but decisions need to be made. You have to prioritize things, of course, right? So this is what the emergency department is all about, actually.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're under typically a lot of time pressure. You have a lot of things going on, multiple patients, and you've got to figure out, where am I going to use my time best? How am I going to prioritize things? What's the most important thing? And how do I make decisions with imperfect information?
Yep.
So I actually found a lot of that. A lot of that is just directly transferable to operating as a senior executive in the business world. Not being afraid of stressful situations, right? Being able to be calm in the face of things that are going on that are maybe not so pleasant or stressful. All of that useful, I think, in both worlds.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's exactly what I was thinking as well, is that medicine really trains you to make critical decisions. Like you have to, and sometimes life or death decisions, like literally life or death decisions without all the information that you would want, right? It's like, I don't know everything, but I know enough that I feel comfortable that this is the right decision. And that you actually have the fortitude to do that. It trains you to say, listen, you don't have to have everything. You don't need to know, sure, you'd love to have every single test run, but if a patient's there that needs critical care, it teaches you how to make a critical decision without having everything that you'd want. And that's really what it's like being a startup, leader of a startup, right? I mean, I never have everything that I want. I never have all the money. I never have all the things that you would want that would be perfect. But making that critical decision, and it's interesting that's the side of, I think, that I've learned over time, and that I'm actually pretty comfortable with now, is that people will stew over decisions and worry, and I'm just like, hey, what information we have in front of us right now, and let's just make this decision based off of the data that we have sitting in front. And I think that both science and medicine teach you that you're never going to know everything that you want to know, but at some point in time, you got to make critical decisions, and really developing a rigorous process to quickly, decide this is all I need to know to make this decision. So how does the risk calculus that you have in your brain of saying, clinical medicine compared to the risk calculus of entrepreneurship? Like what do you think in terms of like the pressure that you feel? Is it the same, or is it different in one setting versus the other?
Well, I would personally say that the risk of running out of money in my company, which is always a risk when you're running a startup company, pales a little bit in comparison to the risk of a patient dying, or you making a mistake and a patient dying or being permanently harmed, right? So maybe that's why I'm a little too level-headed when it comes to worrying about running out of cash in one of my companies or what have you, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but if you think about it this way, life-threatening problems in the hospital and life-threatening problems to your business, right? A lot of
Yep.
similarities.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah, so good. Please go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to just add on one of your earlier points there. I think one other benefit, maybe not so much in today's day and age when we were all walking around with a supercomputer in our pocket, but
Yeah.
back in the 90s when we were living a more analog existence, right?
Yeah.
Um, Knowing where to find out the stuff that you don't know
Yeah.
was a pretty important skill, and I think is important still in the business world, right?
Yeah.
Um, and as an emergency medicine doc, right, there's a lot I didn't know. There's a
Yeah.
lot I wasn't the expert on, right?
Yeah.
I knew enough to be dangerous in a lot of situations, but I knew where to figure out what I didn't know and how to
Yep.
use that, and that's pretty important too, I think, when you're in a business.
Yeah, and I think it's underappreciated that because today it's so easy to access information, but my experience tells me that actually having more information sometimes makes it harder, right? Because you really have to be able to filter and be able to find the right information. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of stuff, and there's just a lot of stuff that isn't helpful as well. And so in some ways, back when you and I were starting our careers, it was easier to be able to get to the right thing, because now we have to just filter through all kinds of stuff. And I know, that's changing. Obviously, there's AI, but AI still today, I think it can send you down the wrong path sometimes. And so I think you and I have plenty of gray hairs, and I'm proud of my gray hair because it's taught me how to filter information, how to process information, that I know how to find the right thing quickly. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I always tell people, there's no problem going to a physician that has a lot of gray hair, because that physician actually has seen it. And part of the best emergency medicine doctors, they've been exposed to everything, right? Oh yeah, I've seen that before. So they, yeah.
There's an old expression about emergency medicine, which I think feeds our natural inclination to be somewhat skeptical of AI, Dave, which is,
Yeah.
you're an ER doc if you don't believe 90% of what you hear and half of what you see.
Well, I think that makes perfect sense to me. So, yeah, it's but it's interesting that how much my background and training, and I believe knowing you and actually you've worked with a lot of trained physicians that have made the transition to business. It really is an advantage to have that kind of rigorous training that you can draw on when you're actually approaching problems. So you've been involved since going to business school and jumping right in, with startup companies. So I think one of the cool things that I appreciate about you is that you're trying to circle back to your beginnings, right? To say, why is it that innovation focuses in medicine and healthcare in certain places, and other places it's been pretty absent? And to be honest, the medical emergency room is probably one of those places where innovation hasn't been, on the top. And why is that? Why is emergency medicine such a tough place for I don't know very many startups that actually are trying to make tools or make approaches or therapeutics that actually are delivered in the emergency room. So why is that? What's your take
I
on
think
that?
it's all because of capital allocation, Dave.
I think
mean,
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Look, I spent a number of years as a venture capital investor as part of my career, so I've worn that hat as well. And if you're a VC, things are pretty risky, right? You're investing in these risky startups, a bunch of risky startups. Well, how do you mitigate that risk? Well, one way you mitigate the risk is investing in areas where there have been attractive investment returns before, right? So I know
Yep.
if I invest in a company with a novel mechanism of action, agent against cancer, right, and it's successful, and it has a different profile from the therapies, or it's better, it's safer, it's different from what's out
Yep.
there, I know that insurers will pay a lot of money for that drug,
Yep.
and therefore the acquirers will pay a lot of money for that company, right?
Yep.
So it's pretty easy. I shouldn't say nothing's easy in venture
Yeah.
capital and
Yeah.
startups, but it's a lot easier to put your money to work in an area like that where there's been, I don't know, how many acquisitions have there been, Dave, in oncology over the years and startup companies? I mean, it's got to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Thousands.
Thousands.
So there's a lot of predicate for people to look at.
Yep.
The flip side is you look at something like emergency medicine, that just really hasn't happened because you don't have that same, unlimited willingness to pay among patients, employers, and payers. And therefore, there haven't been a lot of high value exits to point to.
Yeah.
So if you don't have the capital flowing into the area, you're not going to get, the average medical device or biotech entrepreneur who wants to make something happen is either not going to want to do it or isn't going to be able to do it because they're not going to be able to raise capital to do it, right? So it's not that surprising.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but it's not
a shame.
surprising.
Yeah, no, it is a shame because I mean it's an important place where, I think that a lot of critical care is delivered in the emergency departments, right? I mean, that's where the acute care happens. Unfortunately, as you pointed out at the beginning, the economics of the emergency department are brutal. When you look at other places in the hospital, the margins are very, very different of what the care that you deliver and how it's delivered, and the devices and products that use the emergency department versus other places in the hospital. And hence the reason why they say, hey, lay off all the nurses because our margins are just not, they're really tough. And so I think that obviously, like you said, there's not a lot of precedents to say this is a place where you can innovate and really get reward, because the economics have been really, really challenging in that setting.
Now, to be fair about it, right? The definitive therapy for a patient doesn't happen in the ED all that often.
That's right. It's just stabilization, right?
Correct. So I might see a patient with an acute MI, and I might correctly diagnose the acute MI. But what's going to happen next? I'm going to get them upstairs to the cath lab, right?
That's right.
They get their artery ballooned open and stented.
Yeah.
And that definitive therapy is what's going to command the higher prices. Yeah. My diagnosis and getting that patient, door to balloon time is not getting compensated.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What if you could get rewarded just for being healthier? Meet Galvin, the company using the latest blockchain technology to reward you for taking care of yourself. They help with your mind, body, and soul like a personalized health assistant to track your progress and help you feel better. Galvin's G Plus app rewards you for exercise and assesses your mental health in under a minute using AI and over 2,500 voice biomarkers. If you're feeling off, G Plus gives you personalized power-ups, science-backed techniques to help you feel better fast. And here's the best part. When you prioritize your wellness, you earn crypto. Ready to level up your health? Use promo code GOODMED20 at checkout for 20% off. Download G Plus today at the Apple app or Google Play Store and start your wellness journey with Galvin. So I've always wondered about this, and you seem like the exact person to ask this question. So it seems appealing to me. So obviously, when we develop a new product, there's product risk, right? To say, does this thing actually do what we want it to do, whether it's a device or a therapeutic or a diagnostic? But there's also regulatory risk to everything that we do. Is there a path forward that the FDA and other regulatory agencies say, hey, this thing can actually get approved in your lifetime, or in a way that makes economic sense, and regulatory and product risk, you have to balance those things, right? And I've always been fascinated with acute care setting. It just seems like the endpoints are so fast, right? Because you're dealing with stuff that you're measuring, like outcomes that are measured on a very short time horizon. So what challenges exist from a regulatory side that are different than longer care type of endpoints. So, we're used to running clinical trials. I just started a clinical trial that is going to run for a year of treatment before we measure the primary endpoint. I mean, think about, that's crazy. If I have a hospital-based infection drug, I can measure the outcome of that really dang fast, right? I mean, it's something, but tell me about, because I've always wondered, it's an area I've never done anything in the acute care setting. But what are the unique challenges from the regulatory standpoint of, approaching something that's really on the acute care side of things?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't think the regulatory challenges are that high. It's the clinical operations challenges that are very high, right? So, for example, I'll just use my own company as an example, right? We're developing drugs for pharmacologic cardioversion of atrial fibrillation, right? So the endpoint is pretty clear from a regulatory standpoint, and it happens very quickly. Did the patient get cardioverted or not?
Or not,
right? That's not complicated, right?
It's a yes or no.
Symptoms go away. The ECG shows normal sinus rhythm now, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty simple, and it happens very quickly. If we're successful, it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
But the trouble is, if you're going to develop a drug for use in the emergency department, you have to recruit patients in the emergency department, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes challenging. So when I compare it to somebody who has cancer, I keep going back to cancer only because I know that's your area and because it's been a very successful area for investors and entrepreneurs. But patients who have cancer are in and around the oncologist's office. They're getting seen regularly. The oncologist knows everything there is to know about that patient's diagnosis and immediately knows whether those patients are good candidates to enroll in a study. Yeah. And furthermore, the patient is highly motivated typically to want to be in those studies, right?
That's right.
So the recruitment challenges are a lot less in that kind of chronic therapy setting than they are in the ED. Okay, when's this AFib patient going to show up? Oh, they're going to show up at 3 a.m. on a Friday night, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, are you going to have your study coordinator in the ED at that time? Are you going to be able to get the informed consent, get the patient randomized, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So that's where the challenge comes in. It's in actually executing these studies versus, I think, the regulatory endpoints.
That makes perfect sense. And, I think that as you kind of alluded to earlier, emergency departments are notorious for being conservative economically and conservative about new technology. How do you break through that if you're developing something for that acute care setting?
Well, that's another question, right? So now you're getting almost more to the commercial issues of adoption, right? So, and again, I can speak to this from direct experience. So in my company, as I mentioned, what we're developing, right? What am I combating against when I get commercial? It's actually not really a competitor that I'm up against. The competitor is the inertia of just doing rate control versus rhythm control for patients with AFib. How do I get physicians to say, okay, I have a therapy that's now, it's safe, it's effective, it's rapid onset, it's easy to use. So I'm going to cardiovert this patient instead of just giving them calcium channel blockers or beta blockers, rate controlling them and admitting them to the hospital or keeping them in the hospital that way. So it's a practice change. And that is, by the way, also back to your earlier point, Dave, one of the things that makes it challenging oftentimes for venture capitalists, right? Because they have to believe that you're going to be able to drive that adoption change versus a situation where, again, back to oncology, you're treating patient with drug A, you develop drug B is clearly better than drug A.
Yeah.
Okay, just give them drug B instead of drug A, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And so I think the take-home message here is, everything that we do is hard, right? It's it's really such a challenging field to be involved in trying to translate discoveries and science and innovation into healthcare and into practice. And sometimes I look back and think it's a miracle anything happens sometimes, right? There's so many obstacles, but what keeps you going is really the idea that if you can get there to the finish line, you can make such an impact in people's lives. And it's, just thinking on your career from when you first started to where you are today, there's so many medical advances that have happened. And I think the rate of innovation is, it's tremendous where we are today versus, you and I are about the same age when we first started. I just look back and think, my goodness, it's just an amazing time. It's the golden age of medicine so far, and maybe the next 20 years is the golden age of medicine. But it's just remarkable to me that the stuff that I'm seeing and the pace of innovation. So even though it's so hard, it keeps you hopeful and optimistic about the future that we actually are seeing just amazing things happening.
For sure, and we all keep doing this for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Despite all of the incredible advances, there is no shortage of unmet patient needs, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm working on today actually has been an unmet patient need ever since I was a resident medical student. It hasn't actually changed that much, even though we know a lot more about the right way to treat these patients. So if you're an entrepreneur, you can for sure find things that are poorly addressed that could use your talents.
Absolutely. So why don't we transition to address that? And so it was people out there listening to this that might be, in medicine or medical training that, they got into it because they love medicine, they love the science, but sometimes people wonder, is this the path? Do I want to end up, being like the mentors and the people that train me? Is that really where I see myself? So what would you tell people to say, hey, that time and effort? I think a lot of time people feel stuck because they're like, I put so much into this, I can't change, right? I spent years of my life and hundreds of thousands of dollars in training. There's nothing else I can do. What would be your advice to somebody that's kind of thinking about that right now?
Yeah, so I think there's two different groups of people, right? There's the people who haven't gone to med school yet, right? And there's people who have already done that, right? There's two different situations. I think if you haven't gone to med school yet, you should at least believe one thing before you go, which is you want to take care of patients, right? Because ultimately, really, what's the point of going to medical school if you don't think you want to care for patients in some way? That's mostly what it's about. But I think you're talking more about the second situation, which is a situation where somebody has gone through med school, maybe they've even gone through residency, and they discover that it's just not for them. For whatever reason, they don't want to be a practicing clinical physician. Well, I think the good news is, as you pointed out at the very beginning of this session, there's a lot of other things you can do, right, with a medical degree. It's, given the size of the healthcare industry in the U.S., we're talking about what? 15 or 20% of the U.S. economy is healthcare, so a couple $1 trillion or whatever it is.
Yep.
And a lot of that is not direct, like physician care. A lot of that is other things. It's things like creating products, creating new drugs, creating new medical devices. It's creating new services. Back when I was an investor, a lot of what we did also was on the healthcare services side. And that has no technology involved with it, but it requires deep understanding of just how that kind of patient is taken care of and how you're going to do it better, faster, quicker, more efficiently, right? And in fact, I was a founder of an urgent care company back when I was doing that, and the whole thesis behind that was, hey, there's a whole group of things that are taken care of mostly in the hospital today that would be much more efficiently taken care of outside of the hospital, right? And if you can create a business that does that, it's a win-win for everybody. It's a win for the patient. It's a win for the payer. It can even be a win for the hospital, right?
Exactly.
It's structured correctly. Yep. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, and there's a lot of that opportunity does require understanding deeply the clinical milieu.
Yep.
You understand the workflow of physicians, what patients go through, individual disease states. And that's where most medical devices come from, after all, right? It's usually a physician and or an engineer sitting around together saying, hey, this thing doesn't work quite right. You and I both are friends with Sean Foytik, right? Sean he jokes around and he'll say, hey, they made catheters that went to the right. I made one that went to the left because that's what was needed and it was better. It helped the doctor get the procedure done, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's recognizing it can be very simple things, unmet medical needs that nobody's thought to fix before.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think that just kind of maybe the last point. It's amazing how fast time flies when you're having a great conversation. But I've never met a doctor that didn't have a notebook full of ideas of things that, hey, I wish that I had this, and what if I could do this? What advice would you give to practicing physicians sitting in a hospital right now that has that that notebook full of ideas? What does it just remain in that notebook, or what could they do without without completely just abandoning their practice? And what's the opportunity to actually turn some of that stuff into reality of something that could change medicine?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is maybe would you classify a little bit as a warning, which is that the old saying of new things come out of 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, right? Or something
That's right.
to that effect, right?
Yeah.
And so just having an idea is great, but somebody is going to have to put some real effort into it in order to turn it into a real product or business or whatever. So if you don't want to put that kind of effort in, then maybe it does just stay in the notebook.
No, I think that's been my experience. Is there's no halfway in this business. That if this is a hobby for you, it's not a business. It's hobby companies are, I think, one of the most detrimental things to that it's never. If you're not all in, if you don't really believe it enough to say, hey, this is something I'm willing to put that risk, then it probably needs to stay in the notebook, right? I think that's
right.
been
so
my
I think,
experience.
First recognize how much effort you really want to devote to it. And it's not that you individually have to put all the effort in, but you have to at least be able to convince somebody else who knows what they're doing to put the effort in, right? And so I guess the next step usually is, do a little research, right? Figure out what you think about this opportunity is real or not. Is it just you who thinks this, or do your fellow physicians think, hey, yeah, that's a real problem. I wish I had a solution to that problem. Okay, so that's number one. The second thing is there, patentable art out there around your idea of your solution, right? In this case, not the problem. So validate the problem and validate that there's some way for you to monetize that solution eventually. Because if you can't get some kind of intellectual property around your idea, or on the services side, if you can't run faster than everybody else, right, then you're not going to be able to exploit it or profit from it. So those are probably the two first things you've got to get over. And wrapped in both of those and important all throughout the journey, Dave, is find the right people to work with. Right?
I think that is. What you work on is very important, but who you work with is equally, if not more important, right? It is such an important thing to have the right group of people around you that can actually turn those good ideas and those good inventions into real medicines or real treatments and diagnostics that actually make a difference in people's lives.
And it's one of the great things, we've been talking about making transitions from medicine to other careers. One of the great things that I didn't have to compromise on when I transitioned is, I get to work with a lot of really interesting and smart people.
Yeah.
Right. There were a lot of really interesting and smart people in medicine too, but there's a lot more variety among those people and the folks that I interact with today, because they just come from all kinds of different skill sets and walks of life and what have you. And that's a great part of it. It's a really
it really is. It's fun. It's one of the most rewarding parts of what we do, is just being able to learn and to interact and be partners and team up with people that are really, really smart and bring a lot of new thoughts and new ideas and new approaches to problems that maybe you've been thinking about for a long time. It is one of the most rewarding things that is part of our careers. So I really have learned to love and enjoy that side of things. Well, I think, like I said, time flies when you're having fun. But, I think the take home from today's discussion, for me at least, is medical training gives you a great operating system for solving hard problems. And I think the world needs physician inventors more today than they ever have. I think that we have the opportunity. I think there is more opportunity to actually translate discoveries into things that can benefit people today than there ever has been. And whether it's, the path from being, from the bedside to, from the bench, the bedside to the boardroom, that path is, I think, more accessible than it ever has been. And so I think I try to always end on an optimistic note. I have a lot of optimism for the future. I think the next 10 years are going to be amazing of what we're going to do in terms of having impact on people's health and the longevity of the whole population. And I'm so excited to be part of it. And that's what good medicine's all about. That's what we like to talk about is what's behind all of this, all these discoveries. And thank you so much for joining us and having this great discussion today. And thank you for everybody tuning in. And if you enjoy the Good Medicine podcast, please be sure to subscribe and share our episodes on whatever platform you use to listen or watch podcasts. Just please help support us so we can keep bringing good people on the podcast and have these discussions. So thank you very much. And
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it for today's episode of Good Medicine. Thanks for joining us as we explore the science and stories behind health, medicine, and innovation. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's a great zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please click, follow, and leave a review for the podcast on Apple and Spotify. If you have questions or comments for me, please put them in the comments section on YouTube or reach out on all social media platforms at Good Medicine. Links are in the description. The best way to support the podcast is to check out the sponsors of the show. You can do this by looking at the links in the show notes. That's it for today. I'm Dr. David Beers, and we'll see you next time.